All right, as folks trickle in, we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll jump straight in. My name's Kennedy Odell, and I'm a senior policy manager with Smart Growth America and Locus, our coalition of triple bottom line real estate developers and investors. We are thrilled to welcome everyone to Building the Stack. This is the second installment in our webinar series focused on demystifying project types of particular interest. In this case, we're talking about approaches to building small scale and missing middle housing. I'm going to run quickly through the agenda here. So we've got four speakers. We've got Jim Heid, the founder of UrbanGreen and Craft DNA. He'll kick us off. Then we'll go to Shannon Morgan, the president and co-founder of Renovare Development. Minott, the managing principal at Dream Collaborative, and Jennifer Settle, the senior associate at Opticos Design. We'll start with defining the challenge of constructing and financing missing middle and small scale development, and Jim will kick us off there. Then Jim will talk a little bit about his firsthand experience getting involved in that work before we transition to Shannon, who will talk about her work. And then we'll move to Greg, who will speak to his projects in Boston, and Jennifer, who will speak to sort of a broader lens on the issue with some nationwide case studies. And we'll close out with a question and answer. Quick note that we will run most likely past the hour mark, and we're shooting for a 4:15 conclusion for those of you who may have a tight stop. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. I will pass it to Jim. Jim, I think you might be on mute there.
Okay. Good afternoon. And Kennedy, thanks for the opportunity here. Really well assembled panel. So I'm excited to be able to share some things with this. So as you mentioned, I'm going to try and do this in two parts. One is to define a little bit of the context of this idea of building small and its intersection with the missing middle housing, which of course Jennifer and Opticos have been actively involved in, and then talk about a specific project I've been through that as a way to really contextualize and get a little more granular about some of the lessons learned. So if you go to the next slide, Jennifer. Okay, thanks. So again, part one, so the two parts. First one is this idea of building small and missing middle. Go to the next one. And I usually like to start here because this is a little bit of kind of the founding of building small, the kind of the notion of behind building small, and also a little bit of my journey. And this graphic came out of a workshop almost 10 years ago when a number of the nascent groups that were focused on small scale and incremental development assembled together, Strong Towns, IncDev, Locus, Urban Land Institute, National Trust for Historic Preservation, Green Build, et cetera, et cetera. And we were talking about the way that the industry has really evolved, which at that point in time and over the last probably 2 decades was increasingly focused at this intersection in the upper right-hand quadrant of institutional capital, a very corporate delivery approach, working on large formula projects because of the efficiency and the ability to underwrite those. Go to the next one. But at the same time, I think we were all feeling like there was a need to kind of balance the conversation and begin to bring back what was really the way that we built communities, which was this smaller, contextual, incremental approach to building communities, individuals who were pillars of the community actually working in their neighborhoods and building things that mattered to people, providing a variety of housing types. And they were doing that with bootstrap capital and really an entrepreneurial attitude. Go to the next one. So that led to the book that was published in 2021 called Building Small, which is really meant to provide both the reason or the what and why of what is small scale development. More importantly, the how, the toolkit for all of the different things that are different about small scale development versus institutional corporate kinds of development, and then really some case studies. Go to the next one. So a lot of the questions that I get, especially because real estate is such a quantitative industry, is, well, how big is small and how many dollars? What's the threshold by which a project is no longer small? And I usually like to answer that by saying small scale development is really more about an attitude. It's more qualitative than it is quantitative. But some of the key hallmarks are it's a method for building enduring places. So it's not about a product. It's really how you approach the attitude of development. It looks at a return in a much broader context. So as Kennedy was talking about Locus's role and kind of triple bottom line developers, most of the people that I've met who are in the cohort, the building small cohort, who are really doing small scale development, they're trying to balance multiple imperatives and not just search for 22% IRR. There's a lot about long-term hold and value creation, and they're doing that by building not only the projects, but also the neighborhoods that create the context for the projects they're working in. Go to the next one. So I usually like to share this a little bit as a way to talk about when people say, what do you mean by small? And I say, you know, this was small. This was how we built communities. And the image on the screen there from the Historic Society of New York is really kind of emblematic of the way communities used to get built. Somebody would buy a parcel, they would build a brownstone. Next to it, they would build two more for their family to live in, people that worked for them to live in. It paid the rent, and down the street, somebody did the same thing. And over time, that block filled in with the buildings that formed the street that became the neighborhoods that we love the most. Go to the next one. Small scale development in a lot of ways was missing middle housing before it was cool. You know, before it became a term that we're all talking about now, it was out there. This is from one of our small scale forums in Savannah, the so-called train houses, little 1,000-square-foot duplex, but very dignified in the way that it approaches the street and provided housing for people that worked across the street in one of the larger houses. Go to the next one. Small scale is now becoming the gateway and the entry point for what we like to call citizen developers, people who want to heal their neighborhoods, work in their neighborhoods. This is an example, kind of an updated example of the slide I showed a minute ago, where a young architect in Oklahoma City, Sam Day, built a fourplex, one unit that he could live in, 3 units that his friends where young professionals could live in affordably and paid his rent. Go to the next one. And then this is my project here in the town that I live in. But the other important part about small scale development, it allows us to be incremental and experimental, to do things that try things in the right jurisdictions that maybe the bigger institutional developers can't try because it just hasn't been proven. They can't get all the comps. We're all crazy enough as small scale developers to try and break the mold and do some things that actually usher in products that then oftentimes become the thing that the big institutional developers begin to pick up and do. Go to the next one. So I wanted to talk about this intersection of building small and the missing middle. You can go to the next slide. And, you know, everybody knows this image, very ubiquitous and very important in the conversation around missing middle housing and really talking about what the skill and the art that we've lost of developing between those two bookends of single family homes and mid-rise housing. But this is really missing middle housing as a product. And like so many great things in planning, I have a mantra that after about 3 years, all the great terms get kind of bastardized. And so now missing middle housing covers both product, but it also covers income. Go to the next one, Kennedy. And so we're really talking in a lot of places about this idea of we've got a fairly robust, it's not solving the problem, but at least a fairly robust industry and set of subsidies at the state and federal and local levels to fulfill the housing needs or start to fill the housing needs in that 30 to 80% of AMI. And we have market forces that are doing somewhat, depending on where you are, a pretty good job of trying to hit the 121% and above AMI. But the so-called missing middle from an income are those who make too much for an affordable housing that is subsidized and not enough to buy into the market. And so there's an intersection between this idea of housing product type and affordability. At least that's the thesis. Go to the next one. So I like to talk about building small as creating an ecosystem instead of thinking about individual assets. If you look at the typical real estate model, you underwrite for multifamily, you underwrite for hospitality, you underwrite for retail. In building small, we think about the sum creating greater than the individual parts. And it's made up around 3 pillars: a strong local economy, authentic places, and a solution to the housing crisis. Go to the next one. And that the graphic that I showed you before, this idea of missing middle housing, if you think about this as a Venn diagram, is missing middle housing is one component of that larger ecosystem that makes up the building small environment. Go to the next one. So I want to talk a little bit. So there's been a lot of work being done out there in this space. And I want to talk a little bit about what's working and what's not working. So first of all, there's obviously a lot of work and a lot of traction that's being gained around ADU legislation coming down from the state. quick little factoid, in 2022, California has probably some of the most aggressive ADU legislation passed in 2017. In 2022, 1 in 5 housing units built in the entire state was an ADU. So this notion that small products can be part of the housing solution is really coming true. I think there's a lot more recognition and therefore community alignment around the purpose and the need for housing. YIMBYs are playing a much stronger role in stepping up and helping to support projects. Use changes through a lot of the code changes around density and FAR, and then code reforms that are reducing parking and reducing setbacks, increasing lot coverage, allowing the development and the rolling out of more important products. Go to the next one, Kennedy. But as a result of that, I think the thing is, I look across the national landscape, what I'm seeing is that we're getting a lot of what's on the left, which is good, but it's national and regional builders taking advantage of these changes to the codes to build communities that have more of these missing middle housing products in it, which is great because it's starting to prove comps and it's starting to prove the depth of the market. But what we're not getting enough of is this surgical infill of these kind of 4-plexes, 8-plexes, the kind of intensification of existing neighborhoods where utilities, transit, open space already exists. Go to the next one. And a lot of that is because the math still does not work out. This is a really important and great report that you can get from the Turner Center for Housing Innovation that talks about, as they modeled across a number of cities in California, what was the break-even point or the return for various types of small-scale housing. And unfortunately, it showed that duplexes for sale were probably the only one that was really starting to make economic sense. Go to the next one. So I know part of this is about building the stack. And if you're talking about financing, it's really important as a small scale developer to know a couple of things. First of all, it is not a linear process where the standard, if you're an institutional developer, that you would underwrite it the same way. We talk about a capital stack. I talk about a capital cocktail, where you have a variety of sources that provide the capital for the projects, and you're constantly working that. Unfortunately, it takes up way too much of your time compared to development. But what you can see is a number of things and where those sources might come from: the acquisition, pre-development financing, G&A taxes, development, vertical and horizontal. And it's important to think about these line items as you go into a project and how you could possibly fund these. There are things that I put what I called below the line, which are the items that are likely to come out of proceeds once you've secured, but it's the above the line capital that is usually the toughest. And I'm going to show this in my project when we get to it here shortly. Go ahead, Kennedy, next one. So to close out this part one, I just wanted to say what is still needed. The first is that with a lot of the code changes that are happening, we still have a number of reluctant jurisdictions that will play chicken with a small scale developer. It's like, well, we know the code says that, but we're going to continue to handcuff until you bring legal muscle in to prove that we're wrong. And so we're not getting the kind of scaling that we would like to see. And we need to have the ability to have a legal hammer, basically, to force the jurisdictions to participate. Another big limitation to ownership small-scale housing are defect liability limits in a lot of states, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, where it makes it very expensive to build condominiums. Pre-development funding tools pre-development cash is probably one of the most challenging things for a small-scale developer, and there's some programs that are trying to fund that, pre-fund projects, but it's still a long way to go. And then at this finer grained scale, things like utilities insurance increasingly drive the outcome of the project more than codes. And I think we've got to figure out how at the legislative level to get them to be parties to the solution as opposed to barriers to the outcomes. And then the last one is, as a small developer, where can you get somebody to backstop that construction loan? And so looking for jurisdictions that really want this kind of development, actually stepping in and providing a guarantee. Nonprofits, foundations providing that guarantee. It doesn't cost them anything to do that. They just have to use their balance sheet, but it would go a long way to helping projects get off the ground. Okay, you can go to the next one. I think I'm tracking on time here. All right, so now I'm going to take that kind of abstract overview and walk you quickly through a small scale project. And one of the things about building small that we talk a lot about is that it's hyper local. This idea that as developers, we're committed to the communities that we're in. We're working and building over the long term for that community, not just taking an idea and exporting it to wherever we can find an affordable piece of land. And so I use this graphic because this is the context for my project. Everything you see there in orange are my initial projects. They're within a 500-foot radius of my house, which made it very easy to get out and see site visits. And up in the upper right-hand corner was the project I'm going to talk about, which was a little bit longer bike ride, but again, still very much in the community, seizing on an opportunity that was created, not only in terms of land, but in terms of politics. Next one. So this project started and I would recommend this to anybody, this started not as a project, but as a community conversation about what we needed in terms of housing. And I was retained to lead a series of community workshops to talk about and explore other kinds of housing that would help solve our housing crisis, which was not only about affordability, but was about diversity. So we went through a series of these images where I'd kind of characterize who the buyer would be, what the cost would be, what kind of densities and what they looked like, and then go to the next slide. And then we did a real-time polling and asked the community, what kinds of housing do we need more of? And if you look at the chart, there's two really interesting takeaways. The first one is on the far left, by and large, the community said they wanted to see more of that lovely, romantic, kind of imageable or iconic courtyard small lot housing because it fit into the grain and fabric of our community. But equally important, they said, we don't need any more single family homes. And this was a really important turning point for the community because it was done in a large workshop where everybody had the same vote and we didn't have somebody driving the conversation with a microphone. This opened the door, go to the next slide, for me moving from consultant to the city to then coming in as developer to facilitate and bring to the community what they said they wanted. And what they said they wanted was cottage courts. This site became available. It's 1 acre, sits in kind of a transitioning part of the town, literally for people locally on the wrong side of the tracks, but between a manufactured home development, an industrial park, and a kind of tired aging subdivision. But it was a really unique opportunity to buy and do something contiguous. Go to the next one. So working with Opticos Design, we developed a series of scenarios and sat down with the planning staff and said, what do you think you can support? What do you think the community would support? And what do you think we should be doing here? So there was an early engagement of the planning staff to take ownership and authorship of the outcome. And in the end, we kind of settled on the middle, kind of that Goldilocks scenario of a little more density than as of right, but not so much that we were pushing the envelope from an approval standpoint. Next one. The other really clever thing that was super helpful was then getting to the community and this very kind of dumb, simple set of graphics, again from Opticos, but were super, super helpful by standing up to the community and saying, okay, you all said you wanted cottage courts. We have this site now under control. This is what the codes say we should build, and this is what the codes say we can build. Go to the next slide, Kennedy. But this is what we would like to build. So if this is what you want, we all have to partner together and think differently about the codes. Go to the next one. And so we did, we worked collaboratively, we got everybody kind of aligned and came up with what became River House, a 12-unit on a 1.2 acre site, cottage court, all fee simple, 2 covered parking, series of California unique things, infill exemptions, 3 different product types, 5 national awards. Go to the next one. A little bit of the imagery around it. You can see very much about the centralized public space, the front porches, the cars being subordinated. Go to the next one. Very much about variety of housing types. So in the very front, you see a 500 square foot ADU next to a 1,700 square foot single family house, but all about everybody having a front porch on that public realm. So everybody has an equal place in the dialogue that those units play and converse between each other about the role in forming that neighborhood. Go ahead, next one. And a little bit of an overview. And the thing that's important about this then is this was done with as of right zoning. And although it looks like it probably was a master plan development or a PUD or some zoning hacks, it was not. And the key there was not having code changes, but having a thought partner at city staff that wanted to get this done. And so a lot of times, while I'm very appreciative of all the work going on in policy, I think there's too much emphasis that if we just change the policies, everything will change. And I think it's as much, if not more, about the culture of the planning staff that are receiving these projects. Go to the next one. So there you go. That was kind of the punchline. But anyway, so the lessons on this. First off, So what we did in this, which was a little bit atypical, was we built the urban form of the neighborhood. In so many developments, the engineers, the developer gives the engineer the site plan, says, go to the codes, figure out how to fit in this case, 8 lots on here, and per the code, and then we'll build what sold best, the last project we did. In this case, we actually designed the 3-dimensional urban form of the community. And go to the next slide, Kennedy. And then we laid out the lots. So if you look at this, it's a very gerrymandered plan. And that's the way that we're able to use the existing code, the existing requirements, but still get the urban form that we wanted. And the important part about having that conversation early with city staff was when, if you look at that one lot that says 117, most jurisdictions would say, well, that doesn't meet any of our codes, but they understood what we were trying to do as an intent, and we're able to figure out how to make that work from a code standpoint. You go to the next one. That kind of shows that. So one of the key things to us, we had to have each garage had to be on a lot for them to be for sale. And so we had this situation where the garage was all the way at the back. How do you connect it to the lot that's in the middle? But that lot was critical because it was what called the money lot, because that was the one that actually was the profit of the project. If we hadn't been able to get that 8th lot, the project would have been break even and we wouldn't have undertaken it. Go to the next one. The other thing was creating a diversity of housing. I know a lot of the conversations are about affordability. I'm a big champion that we should be talking as much about diversity, and diversity for life stage, for lifestyle, for housing types. And so we have 3 different product types on here: 500 square foot studio, 1,200 square foot cottage, and 1,700 square foot house, and intentionally intermixed those so there was a granularity and a layering of the physical form that did not feel contrived. Go to the next one. You can flip through these kind of quick and get an idea of what's included in each of these. So, and then the last one was dealing with parking, one of the great things that we always hate. But anyway, so because each home had its own garage on its own lot, there had to be a 3-foot setback. But again, the city, working with the city, listening to the neighbors' concern about not enough parking because ADUs didn't require parking, we were able to gang each of those garages with an air gap. So there are independent buildings technically, but salvage all of those 3-foot interstitial spaces to create 4 on-site guest parking spaces. Just a very clever hack that actually solved multiple goals for the city, for the neighborhood, and frankly, as a developer, it reduced a lot of our construction costs for that parking building. Go to the next one. And then the last one is fire. One of my favorite stories was originally sat down with the fire department, went through all the details and plans. They said, yeah, no, it works. 150-foot hose length, 150 backing distance, get all the way through our permits, go to pull the permit. And they say, well, wait a minute, you got a 220-foot fire lane. And I'm like, no, we already talked about this. Remember, you said it was okay. It's like, no, that doesn't work. Hour ensues, we talk and everything. And finally, go to the next one. The solution became, we have a 150-foot fire lane and a 70-foot driveway. So the math is the same. It's just about semantics. So sometimes finding, again, that thought partner that helps you work through the letter of the code, but understand the spirit and intent of what you're doing is sometimes more important than just changing the code. You go to, I think the next one, we're going to talk a little bit. Okay, the SAC quickly. So back to parallel this to my opening slide there, but you can kind of see how this project's capital stack broke down its various components. The first 2 phases, acquisition and pre-development, were done through myself as sponsor and a high net worth impact investor that believed in wanting to demonstrate different. Once we got our entitlements, we were able to go out and get a construction loan, which paid for the taxes, insurance as we were running, the development of the horizontal, development of the vertical. A portion of the development fee came out of that. But we also, because we were building through COVID, had an overage. And so we had to go back to the investors. And that's why you can see the construction for development vertical. There was a call back to the investors where we had to be able to recapture and bring more money into the project. Below the line, the disposition and warranty, so sale of the product and the warranty that we had to carry comes out of the sale price. And then the same thing with the return to investors. So if you're thinking about your stack, thinking about what you need to capitalize ahead of being able to close the project, and then what you can actually take out of the back end. And I think there may be one more slide, Kennedy, and then, oh, that's it. I think I'm right on time.
Thanks so much, Jim. We'll
Okay.
transition to Shannon if folks just give me one moment to alternate slides here. Um, okay, and one moment. Okay. All right. We should be good to go here.
Awesome.
Shannon, I will pass it to you.
Thank you, everyone. I hopefully am going to take off on some of the points that Jim's really already approached moving forward. My name's Shannon Morgan, and I'm president of Renovare Development. We can move forward, Kennedy. Renovare Development is a woman-owned development company based in Michigan. We really focus on deep partnerships on transformational projects that serve deep community need. Our projects are attainable for sale and multifamily and commercial projects throughout the state of Michigan that really focus on unique and creative capital stacks as well as partnerships moving forward. We can move on, Kennedy. Once again, as I said, our types of partnerships that we're going to talk about today are some of the smaller scale missing middle partnerships, and our partnerships can vary from housing that we're currently working on with the Whirlpool Corporation to a local, very large scale home builder, as well as Habitat for Humanity and local land banks. We recently just entered a partnership in Michigan's Upper Peninsula with the Chippewa Indian tribe. We can move forward. Our pipeline really focuses once again on that middle product. As Jim said, we really look at it from different contexts. It varies from municipality to municipality, both in terms of form, the product that we're focusing on, and we do have a series of missing middle for sale projects that we're partnering on with different types of initiatives. We're going to talk about some of the nuances Jim had, how we created partnerships with the municipalities, some of the funding right now that's very unique to Michigan within the last couple years, but we're also going to talk about a certain structures to look at. And one of the pieces we focus on is just the affordability, attainability, and missing middle, and how we're working through those and when we're formatting our homeowners association, especially for the missing middle components. We can move forward. The first project is a project in Ypsilanti. Ypsilanti is a walk-up market just outside Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we have a partnership with the city on a just over 4-acre parcel that backs to rail and is in the historic district. This is a site that we programmed specifically for missing middle. We have 46 for sale units right now with a mix of cottage, duplex, and townhomes. While we label them townhomes, they range from triplex, fourplex, and others. Of those units, 23 are set aside to be permanently affordable between 40 and 80% AMI. We did this through a unique structure right now that really mirrors some of the initiatives that you'd see in a community land trust, but instead we permanently restricted them in the HOA through deed restrictions. The financing is complex, and we were fortunate to take advantage of financing during COVID, but most recently, our state of Michigan has created a housing tax increment financing program. And we worked with local community development financial institutions to monetize those programs right now and bring them into the projects. It is a non-collateralized TIF program that we are working through all of our programs. In this particular project, through our ARPA funding and COVID, the state of Michigan, through our state housing authority, had what's called missing middle funding, specifically set aside for 60 to 120% area median income. And beyond that, we have additional brownfield redevelopment funds. We have a partnership where we were able to bring in equity here through a local foundation. So we got very creative in this structure. We can move forward. I would think what's most important in this community is that first and foremost, this was programmed on a public parcel. That's a focus right now. Many of our projects moving forward are partnerships with municipalities in some capacity. This was a public parcel, so we were able to have the patience and understanding of a municipality that could support this publicly and help move this project forward. I think a big conversation though that, as a developer that I'd like to focus on is that when you're looking at design, you really have to think in terms of overall affordability, if that is in your structure. And when we talk about missing middle, oftentimes you have to think about if there is a homeowners association, what are you funding right now? In this particular project, we were able to work closely to adopt and make the roads public through the city of Ypsilanti, as well as our stormwater through green initiatives. Also, we talk about single family, but in context, remember that many missing middle prototypes can be deemed single family. And single family right now, when you're focusing on for sale, is the best route to keep it affordable. So our design here was specifically single family cottages, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes that could be in what we call the single family format. That single family format allowed us to make sure that we could get very creative conventional loans for the affordable home buyers. But two, we were able to really decrease our overall costs and our public costs and our insurances to limit HOA fees or additional fees for our home buyers. Once you get, at least in the state of Michigan, according to once you get into condominium structures, there's additional costs that, really increase monthly fees and impact affordability. Not only that, when you're building new construction and you're looking at a condominium structure, those units generally through a funding source are not warrantable. So you're limited on the type of products that you're available from a mortgage aspect for end buyers. So we looked at this both in terms of how do we creatively work with the municipality to finance the project overall, but how do we create an HOA structure that's sustainable long terms. So this has a master condominium in this small 46 unit association structure where we have 32 units right now that are in site condo, even though this is a highly dense communities where we maximize all of our lot line and we have minimized all of our costs. Here we were able, once again, we really had an unprecedented amount of funding mechanisms during COVID that we were able to bring in through many of these new sources that are related to Michigan. So we were able to really start prices at a very low amount and go up to what we call market rate in a mixed income community. Once again, things to keep in mind. One thing that I always say, when you're dealing with anything for incentives, it truly, when we talk about a public-private partnership, incentives oftentimes you need to be fully entitled and site plan approved. So, we need municipal partners that are very flexible in getting us through engineering and site plan approval with some of the last items that can be deemed to administrative approval. That's another key piece because our financing mechanism in Michigan, when we're applying for incentives, we have to come in and already have all our final site plan and public approvals to be able to qualify. So I cannot stress that enough. If you're a municipal here, the cooperation not only to get through public approvals, but be able to move certain pieces, understanding that you're going to have administrative approvals on the back end is critical. We can move forward, Kennedy. Just some other projects that Renovare has in our pipeline, and I'll go through really quickly because my time is short. We're working in different jurisdictions right now. We have the Munising Marketplace. That project is located in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, which is a very rural area. We are partnered currently with one of the largest tribes, the Chippewa tribe. That is a mixed use facility. Munising is the home to Michigan's first national lakeshore. So it is adjacent to a national park and is really experiencing a critical housing shortage. They have not seen any new housing in the last 40 years. This site is a mixed use project that we're looking at anchoring with a child care facility and a grocery co-op with 32 units of middle income housing. So that's specifically 60 to 120%. The biggest challenge there is, once again, our current financing structures don't work. We have tax credits like LIHTC that work in that, but LIHTC likes to see a concentration of lower income units. And tax credits, oftentimes, while we know that childcare is one of the biggest proponents to support housing, oftentimes we have to do pass-throughs. So we're really working on some critical pieces for this. This is a partnership that is with Algier County, as well as the county land bank, that we're working to capitalize this development right now. But in terms of financing, these are initiatives that we're working through with financing measures. I'm going to move over to the far right, and Village is a partnership we have overall. It is located in Grand Rapids, and we are partnered with the Messiah Baptist Church. It is Grand Rapids' oldest Black church organization in the city. This project is a campus. It's just under 5 acres. We have a couple campuses that are underway that are designed to feature both mixed use multifamily developments that transition into housing. The overall goal is to lift people from poverty and move them into home ownership options. So on this, what we will have is an additional 30 units of duplexes that will be set aside for 60 to 120% AMI. Once again, this takes, and the duplexes we have designed in a type of cottage court right now design facility, but we've had to get very creative in a master condominium association in small scale. It's a master association. It's broken down into 2 phases. The first phase will feature mixed income housing, all the way from the lowest housing to 120% AMI with 28 duplexes. In Michigan, we have a very unique requirement that's different from most states. We have something called site condo, which really is single family residence. The duplexes will be in a site condo to minimize, once again, those costs overall. We can move forward, Kennedy. Project T is a partnership with Harbor Habitat. It is located in Benton Harbor, Michigan, as well as with the Whirlpool Corporation. And much like M Village, that is a campus. It is a city-owned parcel. So it is a 5-acre parcel that will feature a mixed-use building. Much like our project in the Upper Peninsula, we are anchoring the first floor commercial with a 24-hour childcare and early childhood learning center through the local community Head Start program. And we're working through a new market tax credit structure here with units that will be set aside and ranging in income. Once again, the overall component is focusing on the workforce. And we have an additional phase here of duplexes in the same scenario. Those duplexes will be located on the corridor in partnership with Habitat. We received a missing middle grant through the Michigan State Housing Development Authority here moving forward. And we will have for sale units that will be set aside to serve 60 to 120%. Now, what we are doing in our for sale components is we are working in partnership specifically with our municipal partners. And so unlike your typical market rate for sale, we are not putting a model up and selling units in there. We are hosting a series of public meetings at different public locations, whether it be city halls or public libraries. We bring in a group of lenders, we bring in credits, repair counseling, we bring in counselors, and we work directly not only through all the essential workers in the communities, but with local employers to do educational seminars in advance of the units coming available. So the local community has access to tools like down payment assistance, have access to tools to fix their credit, have access to tools that often can get them more beneficial mortgages, because we are bringing in CRA lenders, we are bringing in lenders to each projects that are very unique to the communities, and we feel that this is critical. And just circling back in Ypsilanti, in the last project that you saw, we did that. And it was a tremendous success. Of our 46 units, when we released our first affordable units, we are now at a 400-person wait list in that community. So we held a lottery. Once people were approved and they were able to submit their application for financing, submit for the lottery. We held the lottery in City Hall. It was publicly advertised moving forward. All of those people were able to choose and participate in the lottery, and behind that, we created a wait list, and we're hoping to work with communities in the same type of initiative moving forward, that it was very purpose driven. And we
I
kept
apologize.
it specific.
We're running a little long, so I just got to keep us moving if that's okay.
Yep.
But that's really helpful. And if folks want to follow up, we will share the slide deck, and we, reach out after, and we can help sort of connect folks who want to talk about specific things. But
And that was my last piece, so thank you.
perfect. I'm going to go ahead and change the deck back. We'll just have one quick transition. All right, Greg, we'll pass it to you.
All right. Thank you, Kennedy, and thank you, Shannon. So thank you, everyone, for the invitation to take part in this program. And my name is Greg Minott. I'm the co-founder of Dream Collaborative, and I am the leader of the development arm of the company. We have a few different arms of the company, which I'll talk about. I have over 25 years of experience. I've been working on inclusive development, design, planning, and urban mixed use, residential and adaptive reuse projects across the country. And today I'm going to be talking, as my other esteemed panelists, on the promise of the missing middle. And I'm going to be talking about my experience in the Northeast specifically. Next slide. So we're Boston based. But again, we work across the country, and we also work at a variety of scales, from small scale to some of the more sort of institutional driven projects. So we come at it from a very diverse perspective of diversity of thought, and that helps to inform our decision making. The sweet spot that we'll talk about and show today is the missing middle. And when we founded the firm 17 years ago, we recognized that traditional tools and bringing ourselves together weren't working to solve the housing crisis. So as a firm, we decided to integrate architecture, planning, and development to really deliver on this promise of missing middle, and center it on community voice and focus it on triple bottom line returns, as we heard earlier. So just for some context setting for Boston, we are the third highest in the nation in terms of cost of construction. So when you see some of the numbers in the capital stack, don't be alarmed. But we're working through that to deliver on this promise. Next slide. And so our commitment for community voices is reflected in our approach. So we prioritize deep local engagement and listening at the start of every project. And we co-create a vision with the residents. And then we deliver it in terms of this integrated in-house model of bringing architecture, planning, and development together, leveraging both public as well as private capital or market-driven capital to create the kind of enduring outcomes that we all are looking to achieve in terms of affordability, sustainability, and inclusive spaces. Next slide. The first case study I'll talk about today is 2147 Washington Street in Roxbury. You can go to the next slide. So this is a model for really inclusive and infill development specifically. It's a larger project. The second case study is smaller. But first, for this one, we have 62 units of rental and 12 units of home ownership in one building. So it's a total of 74 units, and 95% of which are affordable, including we have LiveWork studios for artists. So we co-created this project with the community, which desired to see income of all different ranges, from homeless set aside all the way to true market, and that's what we delivered here. And we built this project on city-owned parking lot in Nubian Square, which is the center of Roxbury. And we did it through a public RFP process. We acquired the site for $1, which is part of what is needed to really make these kind of projects work. We also had a local nonprofit partner who was who owned part of the site, and they will help us with ground floor food, retail, and art. And it's a passive house project. And just to show you the kind of demand that we see here, we had over 4,000 rental applicants for 62 units and over 300 applicants for the home ownership units for just 12. So it's a massive demand. Next slide. So the capital stack, as we've heard before, is kind of a cocktail for most of these projects. For this project, we had it broken into a home ownership capital stack and a rental capital stack, which I'll show you next. So just focusing you on the left column, you'll see it's a simpler stack versus the rental, but a key part of this was using a state-run program called the Commonwealth Builder, which is essentially a gap filler and specifically set aside for home ownership projects in underinvested communities. And that ranges between 70 to 120% AMI, which from Massachusetts for a family of 4 is incomes between $98,000 and $168,000. We also had several inclusionary development set-asides as well, and then used passive house rebates and other things to make up the stack in addition to construction loan. Next slide. On the rental side, it's more of what we see as a traditional cocktail for the LIHTC. So this did require state and federal LIHTC, but we also brought in state and city resources and workforce housing programs to really target that middle income band, which about 40% of the rental units focus on that middle income band. Next slide. So just to show you the project in context, 2147 Washington Street in Roxbury, the site in the yellow star is about 2 miles south of Boston, the downtown financial area. And Roxbury is a part of the city of Boston, and Nubian Square specifically, which is where this project sits, is the center of the African-American culture in Boston, which has severe housing needs. And the city of Boston several years ago created Plan Nubian Square to create a roadmap for implementation of that plan for publicly owned parcels and their conversion into housing. And 2147 Washington Street was identified as one of the parcels as part of that plan. Next slide. So this view shows the site before development. It was previously a parking lot. The only building that sat on there was for that local nonprofit, which I'll reference, Haley House, which is part of the project. Next slide. And so we purchased the city-owned lot, as I said, for $1, and then through a complex land swap to bring the local nonprofit Haley House to the street front, we purchased their land in exchange for a commercial condo for them and built a larger building. Next slide. The ground floor supports local artists and economic activity, including a cafe, dance studio, and a makerspace, and we created a courtyard in between the new and existing building. Next slide. And so we have, through thoughtful architecture, we really delivered a beautiful contextual design and passive house quality living. Next slide. And we recently toured the project as part of the American Institute of Architects National Convention that was held in Boston earlier this month, and shown here is a courtyard in between the new and the existing building. Next slide. We also commissioned public art in the lobby by a local artist, which honors the local culture of the area. And finally, all units, both the rental or the condo, are similar sizes and have the same quality finishes as well. So the second case study is 24 Westminster Avenue in Roxbury. It's also an infill development. You can go to the next slide. And our role, as with the previous project, was both as developer and architect. Development cost for this one it's much smaller. It's 7.1 million. It's just under a quarter acre. So if you do the math, it's about 60 units per acre. So quite dense, given that it was in a primarily a single family or duplex neighborhood. But the focus of this project was based on the Mayor's Office of Housing Innovation competition that wanted to see more of this middle income, more compact development. And so we proposed 12 units of home ownership, again, targeting that middle income band of 80% to 100% AMI for home ownership. And it's currently under construction. Here again, we have the key to the capital stack was this Commonwealth Builder Program I referenced previously. Here, it's to the tune of 250,000 a unit. So you can see it's a pretty significant part of the capital stack in order to make these projects like this work. Next slide. So the project site was long vacant for several decades. There used to be a single family home on this lot. And our concept, next slide, is meant to maximize the number of units, making the project financially feasible while addressing the need for smaller units in a part of Boston that contains mostly larger units. Next slide. So the units are arranged to support multi-generational families as well. That's a key distinction of this project. And this flexibility gives the option for older residents with grown children to share a household or accommodate extended family or younger individuals. And families, it gives us families a space to invest and accommodate their future for all phases of life. Next slide. So it is under construction. It will be completed later this year. So these are just some interior and exterior shots. And finally, we are, I think like everyone, we're looking for collaborators, and we're excited about the kind of work that we do, and we'd love to scale it up with like-minded investors, municipalities, and institutions. So I've included my contact information. It will be shared in the presentation, I'm sure. So look forward to reaching out, and let's build more together. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg. We'll transition to Jennifer.
Good afternoon, everyone. And Kennedy, just holler if I need to speed it up to keep us on track. But thanks for having me. Opticos is a group of urban designers, architects, and strategists that are really passionate about enabling vibrant, diverse, and walkable neighborhoods. And we've focused much of our work across the country on missing middle housing. So Opticos coined the term missing middle in 2010 and wrote the book on the topic in 2020. We have offices in both Berkeley, California, as well as where I'm located in Chicago, Illinois. Our work focuses both on the private sector side to design and get these communities built, as well as the public sector side to develop neighborhood plans and the zoning ordinances needed to enable middle housing. It gives us this unique perspective and really fun collaboration with both public sector who don't necessarily understand some of these development cost and implications, as well as developers to understand some of those capital stacks, some of those feasibility concerns, and bring both. Our work really tries to bridge that gap. Next slide. So as you've heard, we know there are many, many barriers that currently stand in the way from getting these projects built. Our goal is really to help remove some of those barriers that we can make it easier for all of these great projects that you saw today to get built without the brain damage or those extra costs that they often have to incur because they're a type that hasn't been seen or hasn't been built as much recently. So today, in the last 10 minutes here, I'm going to really focus on less about the projects, but more about tools for educating and supporting these small scale development. And, recognizing that the barriers kind of come from all these different angles. These are sort of the top 4 buckets that we tend to find in our work. Next. And we know, we need to be thinking about remove these barriers on several different fronts. So it often starts with the less, fun stuff of fixing your zoning. We know the regulations often prevent missing middle or small scale developers from even coming to the planning desk or coming to the table. And that's a really important piece. Zoning is not a silver bullet. It needs to be fixed, but it's not going to actually get these things built, right? So we also have to be thinking about removing barriers in our systems and our processing, developing financing tools and removing some of those barriers, as well as recruiting more developers and training staff and systems, the support systems to get these projects through. So as a community, it's really imperative to be thinking about all of these fronts. But it really, and rebuilding that system, but it really does start with ensuring you have the environment to even allow these projects and these developers to come to the table. So it starts with that zoning. Next slide. We like to make the point that zoning is a 100-year-old operating system, right? It was conceived in that same year that this old camera was developed. And that's definitely not how we take pictures anymore. So why are we using the same outdated models to regulate what happens to our cities, right? So many of these great projects aren't allowed in our systems, and our construction industry, our development industry has changed over time, but our zoning tends to be lacking and is based in sort of outdated models. So it's really important to see your zoning as a living document that responds to your local market and the development industry, as well as the vision for your community. So it's really an economic imperative to start to open up more of our communities for these types of housing that you see here today. Next. And our work really starts with identifying those zoning barriers. We know it only takes one regulation to make it difficult for some of these projects to make sense. So identifying those barriers in both your zoning and your policy level allows you to have the conversation of where do we start? And this sort of informs whether you can make really incremental or targeted changes and that opens up a lot of housing choices, or whether you need a more robust overhaul to your zoning. Next. But we know zoning is pretty dense and it's legal language that's really hard for communities to understand and get their head around. So there's a lot of fear and misconceptions that come with zoning changes. And it's really important to both the community conversation as well as the staff that's administering these to graphically visualize what we mean and what those changes or what our zoning actually encourages and produces. So a lot of our work, and this is similar to those really dumbed down in graphics that Jim showed it, but they can be really effective at communicating what's currently allowed and encouraged, and then how we can reverse engineer those regulations as well as the outcomes for middle housing that we want to see. And I think that's, important for the community to understand that you're encouraging these house scale products, and that they can really start to move the needle on what's attainable in your market. Next. One of the key things that I'm super excited about this presentation is that these capital stacks, these conversations on feasibility should really be informing our zoning and our policy changes. It's imperative to understand what goes into the development pro forma, and which ways we can actually impact or move the needle on those numbers. So we've been in communities where they've said, we're going to allow 3 and 4 units. We've made the zoning changes. We're really proud of ourselves. And it's true. That's a really important first step. But then we run the numbers and we realize it takes 6 units to get a small scale building to pencil, right? And they just went through a year-long process of changing the code for a product that currently doesn't pencil in their market. And I think what this graphic starts to show is the different development and construction costs. So on the left is there a rough breakdown. You saw some of these numbers earlier today too, of hard hard costs and soft costs that a developer incurs. On the right are the things that a community can start to think about that directly improve or impact feasibility. So there isn't necessarily a lot we can do as planners or housing advocates to change the cost of materials or lumber for a project, but we do want to recognize the direct impact that our regulations can have around building smaller units, or advocating for lot areas that can dramatically shift the cost of land to develop these small multi-unit buildings. Next. So when we think about zoning updates, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's really about building that understanding of the outcomes that you want to see. Regulating for these specific building types and forms goes a long way. And then you've heard it here several times, really being specific and allowing these types by right. We should not be regulating a 4-unit building the same way we do a 100-unit building, but that's exactly what most of our zoning codes do. And we really need to take a closer look at them to understand what are the regulations needed to allow these smaller buildings more easily. Next. The next one I want to address is really the need to shift our industry standards and the conversation about what small scale multi-unit can look like. Over the course of the last 80 years, right, we've really set up our financial systems, our planning, our policy, and our development industry with that single family detached house in mind. Over the last couple decades, we've created the systems to deliver a much bigger scale of housing, those 4, 5, 6, 7-story apartment condos, and make those economically viable. But there isn't much in between those two things, right? Except for maybe townhouses that I added a third thing. Next slide. So this project is an example of a large site just southwest of Omaha for a town of about 25,000. And in the end, there'll be a total of over 700 units on 50 acres of land, and it's entirely rental housing. The developer here typically did large garden-style apartment complexes, and the community was fairly resistant to multifamily of any kind. They didn't have a lot, but they recognized the growing need. So the developer came to us and said, I want to do something different. Instead of one large project in a single building, said, I want to create a neighborhood made up of smaller missing middle types. You see the number of units in each of the buildings here. And it's this variety of both types and units and price points that really started to dramatically shift the conversation about what multifamily housing could look like. And notably, I think it's important to say that this wouldn't have been possible if they hadn't first changed the underlying zoning to allow these types, as well as have a mayor who really stepped up to lead and say, we need this type of housing in our community. But as Jim said, this is a similar project, same project that Jim mentioned earlier, We need more of these projects, but we can't rely on greenfield sites alone. Not every community has 50 acres of available land, and we need to make these product types work in more infill and more locations across our cities and communities. Next. And we need to go beyond just allowing them. We actually have to encourage or incentivize them. Currently, the playing field is not equal for single family versus middle housing types. And in going beyond allowing, we need to actually make this an attractive product for developers and builders to build. Most of our regulations are written to incentivize that single family house. So it's important to take a closer look and recognize that middle housing also has to often overcome higher impact fees, more complex permitting, sometimes a higher cost per square foot, often more parking, as well as a lack of developers that have been doing this scale of work. And so we really need to think about how we can overcome some of those barriers and even the playing field. Next. One of the ways that cities have started to incentivize that, or one example, is pre-approved building plans. So this example here is a project we worked on in South Bend, Indiana. It had a weak market where land values were low, and they had a lot of vacant infill properties. They had gone through a big, robust zoning update to allow middle housing, but the cost to build and appraise new units was still really tough to pencil. So the city looked at innovative ways of lowering the cost to deliver new housing, and they offer pre-approved building plans for types like cottages, carriage houses, duplexes, and sixplexes, as well as a tax abatement program for new home construction, an additional program that helps waive or cover sewer hookups and for new infill. And these incentives have been really key in encouraging smaller and nonprofit developers to add these middle housing types to their portfolio. Just recently, City Council approved a developer's petition to do scattered site development on 37 lots using the pre-approved plan, as well as using LIHTC funding. And the unit that just sold, the builder, the owner of that building, recognized that the pre-approved building saved them about $30,000 in development costs, which was huge, both in time as well as the cost to hire an architect and go through the entitlement process. Next. So South Bend continues to chip away those barriers and create that system that supports local housing providers and provides technical assistance and incentives for small scale developers. And they're seeing the results of that work, right? All of these different types were built in the last couple of years since they updated their zoning and are allowed by right. So they're starting to see that diversity. Next, a lot of folks spoke about this here, so I won't go into detail, but we really need to start thinking about how we can reduce the cost and complexity of these middle housing building types. And with that, it goes beyond just our zoning to think about the impact that other regulations like our building and fire codes, our subdivision standards, often our stormwater and impact fees all have on smaller multi-unit constructions. Next slide. Right, our building codes, both our International Residential Code and the IBC, the International Building Code, are hugely important, right? There's definitely not a push to reduce life safety, but we do need to take a closer look at those because often they're treating that 4-unit building the same as that much larger building. And so it's important to look at it and consider ways that we could start to revise or allow up to 4-unit structures to fall under the much simpler or more prescriptive IRC to reduce some of those complexities and think about some of the requirements in our building code that are adding unintended costs to these smaller buildings. Next. Zoning isn't enough. Our financing and our policy, things like defect liability, all have the direct impact. And we need to start identifying those creative financing tools that you heard a lot about from Shannon and Gregory today. But really important to look at that menu of financing tools and identify which ones are applicable to middle housing. right? A lot of those, similar to our zoning, are aligned with single-family houses, and others are intended for much larger projects, and the complexity of them doesn't make sense for a small-scale developer. So in this case, in Chicago region, we just did a missing middle toolkit that started to look at some of those tools and strategies and make the connection between which ones would be applicable for these smaller buildings. And I think it's really important to, as a city, to make these accessible for small scale developers who don't have the big legal team to sift through all of these possible requirements. Next. The good news is there's more and more examples of communities that are enacting legislation and plans that move away from single family only zoning and start to make some of these changes in both the zoning as well as the building code that open up more possibilities for middle housing. Next. The last big bucket, we know there are a lot of misconceptions around multi-unit and rental housing, and it's important to address those concerns and work with your community to build support and understanding for middle housing, which really creates this welcoming environment for small-scale developers like those on this call. They know their market, they know their community, and they're looking for those places that have done their due diligence and their work and built up a community that supports middle housing. Next. We know our current housing production does not meet the current and future needs or preferences of much of our population. There's a growing amount of single person or 2-person households and seniors. There's a lack of starter homes, and renters are often severely cost burdened. So we need housing choices that better meet those changing needs. And it's important to have this conversation and frame zoning changes, frame changes in your development industry with this in mind, right? What is the need and who is it serving? Really starts to go a long way in reducing that fear and the pushback. And this is important because that pushback has direct cost on the project and the developers, right? Adding public hearings that changes the design late in the game or adding time can really be a cost that prevents a lot of these smaller buildings from getting built. Next. We talked a lot about this, but defining middle housing is really important. The term has certainly taken on a life of itself, but it's important to bring people back to this 2 criteria of middle housing, right? That house scale form that makes it really viable in neighborhoods, as well as the secondary part that it's attainable to middle house called incomes and often affordable by design because it uses those same construction methods as a typical house. Next. When engaging your community, it's imperative to go back to that why. Talk about the need and what ways that middle housing can support some of your community goals, from attainability to sustainability, and of course, helping support the local economy. Next. There are many, many ways to engage your community on the topic, and it's really important to do so, to continue to talk about why we need middle housing, and bring this to people where they're at. So there's different strategies of creating a campaign, education materials, visual preference surveys. Walking tours can be really effective tool to take people to neighborhoods that have middle housing in their communities. Often they don't even know it's there, and talk about some of those characteristics that make middle housing effective, and really overcoming some of those questions and conversations. Shannon mentioned before, building partnerships and allies are really, really critical in our work. We do a lot of technical assistance through AARP, which is a major advocate of middle housing. They also have a ton of resources on their website that Opticos has worked on, and other great national experts that can be a tool, a really accessible tool for both engagement as well as those looking to update their standards. National Association of Home Builders is a key partner, and we've had a lot of success talking with national and local realtors associations. So identify those partners in your community that can help build broader support. visualizing what middle housing can look like is really key. We've talked about this a lot, of identifying areas in your community where maybe there's city-owned parcels that you could demonstrate what it looks like and take some of that fear, but also develop an understanding of what that capacity might be. Next. Those city-owned parcels are also great candidates for pilot projects that could help test future zoning changes, or provide that opportunity to partner with local nonprofits and build on city-owned land. This is an example from Kalamazoo, Michigan, where the city subsidized a duplex and a carriage house that they later implemented as pre-approved plans, along with zoning changes, and gave them the ability to test both the feasibility and the attainability of these types in their market. Next, I'm wrapping up here. So it's really important. I hope you come away with this with some really great examples of projects that you could look to, but also that you go to your communities and think about what's that next step you could take to start to become a place that supports middle housing and welcomes these projects into your community. And that's it. I think so thanks everybody for being here, and I'll turn it back over to Kennedy.
Thank you all for your time. I want to sort of close this out by saying if you have any questions, we're a little tight on time, but if you want to go ahead and drop them in the chat, our panelists are around and we can share them with them. And so we'll do that here in a moment, but I want to sort of hit our last notes before I jump in that. One, Locus is the host of this convening today. We, as I said at the top of the call, work a coalition of triple bottom line real estate developers and investors focused on delivering sustainable, livable, equitable communities. We're always looking for new members. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are offering discounted membership prices through the summer as part of our Building the Stack series, and we'd love to have you. Also, our next Building the Stack webinar is on innovative approaches to housing finance and development, like the community land trust model and other unique and novel funding structures. We'd love to have you join us for that. All of these resources will be packaged into a blog post that we will share with all the folks who registered for today's webinar, and it will include access to these slides. So I do want to take one moment for question and answer if we have just probably up here for about 3 minutes. From Melinda, it seems like having a local government willing to provide incentives is critical to fiscal feasibility, which can be pretty challenging in some states. Melinda references southern states. Do y'all have any advice on how to help small-scale developers and municipalities where public funding like pilot and TIF is typically allocated to larger developments done by well-known developers and where the state/city do not have the money / are not willing to provide grant programs to support them? I'll offer that to anybody who would like to field it.
I think I would just say, we've worked in all sorts of states politically, ranging in north and south and east and west. And I think there are so many tools you can start to look at. Asheville, North Carolina was one where it was actually the development community that was putting the pressure on, as well as Nashville, Tennessee, and Memphis, Tennessee, that are doing a lot of innovative things with their zoning and their entitlement process. And I think it's important to not underestimate some of those smaller adjustments to things like sewer and water tap fees that go a long way, and thinking about it maybe on a smaller scale, that TIF isn't always necessary for these smaller projects. Those are really helpful for bigger entities, but when we talk about the gap for small scale, it can be a lot smaller. And so I think it's important to identify those little pieces that typically we find are a conversation to be had in almost all communities.
Okay, awesome. And then we had a question earlier in the chat. Thoughts on a carrot for change instead of a hammer approach? Sort of how do we incentivize positive behavior? I'm assuming this is from Jennifer from municipalities and states, but Jennifer, correct us in the chat if that's not the audience you were discussing. I'll pass that to the panel.
I mean, I think the incentives, and it was touched on a couple of times, but I think the incentive doesn't have to be a written incentive. I think it's really a cultural thing where the planning staff, commission, and everybody kind of are open door and open collaborators. So the ability to sit down and have a conversation and work through things collaboratively, as opposed to having to get everything documented and then present it and then be told all the things that are wrong with it. So I mean, we all talk in the building small cohort. I mean, communities that really welcome you to come there and work and are open for that is a huge incentive beyond anything in terms of your codes and finance and else. If you have an attitude and a culture where you're welcoming the developer, that's a very significant incentive. And it really doesn't cost the city anything. It just requires leadership to tell the staff that you're here to help get things done, not just interpret the black and white of the code. So,
Okay. Any last notes from the panelists before we wrap here?
Yeah, I'll just add on the incentives, and I touched on it during my presentation as well. Like the city has a lot of, our municipalities have a lot of control on land and the cost, and what parts of that welcoming and really incentivizing development that Jim just mentioned is one incentive is just how much are they disposing the land for, because that land basis is a key part of the formula for making these projects work. So in the case where we got land for $1 in one instance, the other instance we paid more, but it was significantly less than market. There's also rebates from utilities, or the utilities play a big part in how much, how feasible these projects are. And so working with them, I think the municipalities could play a big role in helping, just having these kind of cooperation agreements with them to make these kind of projects work. So I would say it's more of a collaboration and having these conversations, not necessarily having to have stacks of money or grants to make these things work. There are a lot of other things that come into play.
And I'll just take off on that really quickly. Collaboration, think creatively, and incorporate all of these pieces. So, if you're not looking at incentives, you're not looking at public land, you're looking at opportunities to reduce impact fees or community fees. Are you looking at employers that could participate? Are you looking at CRA or community development financial institutions that could participate? Are you looking at any type of foundations? Are you looking at emerging developer tools? Because in small scale, in most of the communities I'm working at, there's all different types of initiatives that are sponsored through just emerging developer tools. So you really have to look across the collaboration, across the toolkit, and across all the incentives to leverage all of the pieces.
Just to sort of recap what everyone said, it sounds like when there are so many challenges, there are so many entry points and so many ways to provide relief when there are so many barriers. So perhaps that's an upside. I wanted to thank all of our panelists for being so generous with their time this afternoon. We really appreciate it. Again, all of these resources will be sort of recapped in a blog post and shared with every event registrant. But we appreciate your attendance, and we hope you found today to be helpful and meaningful. Thank you all.